talk about some district-wide issues. So there are a whole bunch of questions here, most of which came out of my discussions with board members and my reconstructing of my notes from board meetings. It seems that we always come up to some form of this issue of what information do we need in order to represent our communities, to do our jobs better, to make better decisions, and to perform those governance functions that are the reason we are serving in these positions. And then the second class of questions is what are the norms and expectations between and among us as board members and with community members on sensitive issues, with members of the administrative team, particularly the superintendent and the business administrator, and with other members of the district. So with that in mind, just as a way to kind of start the conversation, but also to answer specific questions that were to help answer specific questions that were very frustrating to me and several other board members over the last couple of months as personnel issues became community issues. I asked Flo to please give us some advice about what we can say to members of the community, because sometimes I think over my years of service I've heard, mostly out of frustration and out of fear of exacerbating the situation, the superintendent or others saying to me, well, when those come up, you just can't talk to people at all. And that's really not an option for me as a community representative. I have to have a way to come to people, to talk to them, to answer their questions without jeopardizing that information, sensitive information, while things are going on. So I think mostly this is for your information, just to have in your files, so that when these issues come up again, because they will, you'll have a way to kind of talk to people. And this is not a script. This is just a paragraph that Flo drafted at my request to try to help us think through these kinds of issues. And it's, of course, not just personnel matters, but other matters as well that might come up that we can't discuss publicly, but we need to respond. Then I guess I would add to this paragraph, and I could read it. I don't think I need to, because you can all read. But I would also add to this that I believe that we have a positive obligation to communicate what we're hearing in the community back to the superintendent, who is the CEO of the district, and to the business administrator when that's appropriate, and perhaps to other board members. So if we are talking only out in the community but not bringing it back to the leadership of the district, it's difficult for them to do anything about the issues that we're seeing in the community. So those are just two thoughts I had, and not, Flo, is there anything else you'd want to add to that or say about it?
I mean, obviously you can say whatever you wish. That's more. I'm just providing helpful guidance. I hope so you can understand the parameters of the law and what you should and should not discuss based on what the law says. And employment records and what you learn as board members about employees because of your role as a board member is subject to these provisions in the law, and I would recommend that you be very careful about your communications. And there is a process by which the district has put forth, how you address these issues. And that process gets sort of circumvented and contorted when there are miscommunications or communications that may or may not be based on fact. And so I would encourage you to follow what you've done in the past, and you've delegated that authority to the district and to the superintendent and business administrator. Let them follow their process, and then when you get involved pursuant to that process, you will not be biased by the things that you've maybe discussed. And you certainly should be discussing things and communicating things as Heather suggested to the district. But if something comes to your attention, I guess I would suggest not to opine about what should happen. in that context, but just to pass that information on. Other than to say, here's the process by which you make a complaint, or here's a process by which you can put that forth to the district so that the district can follow their procedures and address that issue.
Well, and I think it's so interesting you're saying it that way, because we just heard from our people who were asking questions of the community that we're not involved in it.
I heard that
and
too.
I'm like, okay, but this is exactly, this to me is what, what has happened over the years is that board member is not able to say or whatever, and we're saying to a community member, well, we can't do anything with that, or we can't talk about that, you'll have to deal with the superintendents, and that's where, that's a huge, I think if they're having a hard time coming to the schools, trust me, they're having an even harder time coming to a Board of Education.
And Rose, I think, I just want to be clear about this. I'm certainly not saying we have no influence or efficacy in these matters. I think that we do. But the problem comes when you're jeopardizing, when you're running afoul of employment law, and when you're, acting as an individual, talking to people about what ought to happen out in the community, setting expectations that then you can't actually deliver on, and that you could create additional liabilities for the district. That's the purpose of this. It's not to tell you not to talk to people, and it's not to tell you, certainly not to tell you not to bring things back to the school district. And I think it's worth following up on the comments that Lorena brought to us about what it actually said on the page was board members need to be involved and need to understand what's going on in the district. It did not actually say board members are not. It simply said they need to understand. And I agree with that, absolutely, and want to find other ways to do it. And I want to listen to people when they come with complaints, and I want to help them find a way to resolve complaints. What I don't want to do is to set myself up as someone who can fix something when really I can't.
Oh, wow.
And by trying to fix something, I could actually create additional problems. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I tell people all the time I'm pretty impotent when it comes to.
And again, I would not call it impotence. I actually think I have quite a bit of influence on Mikkel and Janet.
Oh, well, I don't.
You don't think I do? Or
No,
you
I don't think I do.
Okay.
I can just look at what's happened in my district, so no, I definitely don't.
And again, I think that is about cultivating a human relationship and trying to find a way to express things to people. But it doesn't make you more powerful, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but it doesn't make you more powerful or more influential to go out into the community and say, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to, get this fixed. You know what I'm saying? Mike.
So my experience has been a little different even this year if I look at, and I'm just getting this document, so I'm scanning it, but it says here the board approves employment contracts, salaries, benefits, and dismissals. And that's been my understanding of my role. But then I get people from the community calling me, telling me that this principal is like, when Lori Lacey's staying at Edison. I had no idea. And so people in the community are calling me, and I said, yeah, I don't think that's happening because, and I tell them the latest information, and then I find out a day or two later, yeah, she is staying. Same thing happened to me with the principal at West. I had no idea. For like 24 hours, people are telling me who the new principal is, and then I wasn't included in the email. So my concern is that we comport ourselves to the law, that if the board approves these, then let the board know first before people in the community know.
And I agree with you, Michael. I agree with you. I think it would have been my preference that we find out about Lori staying sooner than we did, and I think that's been communicated. I think that was not, again, it was a process. It was not an intentional failure. Mm-hmm. And as far as your communication about the West High principal, you know what happened there. It was a typing mistake. I went back.
No, that's happened before.
No, but Michael, listen to me. I went back to and looked at every single item in my inbox since you became a board member, labeled either weekly memo, confidential memo, and I did not see your name missing from any of those.
Oh, I can send you the ones where that's happened.
Well, that'd be great. It'd be more important to make sure the superintendent knows, so that you can make sure he gets you on.
Well, he's aware. I've let him know.
But Michael's point, I think, is true. And
I do too.
And that we really do not. Where's that line that you underlined?
The board approves.
Yeah, board approves employment contracts, salaries, benefits. I mean, we're informed of them, but, and I don't mind the way it's working. I just don't think this accurately represents what happens.
I agree.
There's one thing that I think can be clarified that should just help, particularly Catherine and Melissa, with John Robson went into great detail with the board a year or so back about what that means. And so when you see the human resource report on your agenda, when you first hire somebody, that's their employment contract. Where they're then assigned in the system, you may or may not keep track of based on their position, nor on some you might not care. But certainly with principals and directors, we're trying to always inform the board first anytime there's a change. And so those are
And
different.
that's not what
Let me-
my
let me-
interpretation was.
So and the employment contract,
That's right.
specifically that these are the negotiated agreements that we
No.
have.
I don't have a problem with the way it's working. I think it's working, well, I'm just saying that I don't think this language, I think this language gives the wrong impression to the public
What's happening.
about what's really happening. Because, we're not, and I understand what you're saying about the consent agenda. I mean, we do say, we do sign off on the agenda, and I do read those reports, and they're very interesting. The Hoppy Taws are the most interesting. But I don't think that we really do.
But that's a state law. This is, what you're reading is the state law. The board.
Approves employment contract, salary, benefits, and dismissals. That is the.
That's
No, that's the Board of Education handbook.
handbook.
So
It's
we
in the
could
state
change
laws.
that language if we wanted to.
No, it's in state law.
Okay, well,
Yeah, the
Unless
law.
you're in the legislature, you're not going to change it.
The
okay.
statute allows, it specifically calls for the board appointing the superintendent and the business administrator. And pursuant to those appointments, then you have delegated to your superintendent and to your business administrator the employment and employment issues. And so they administer those.
So you're saying that this is not in the law, that the state Utah code does not say, or that we approve the employment contract, salaries, and benefits? At least it says employment contracts and salaries. You're saying that's not in the law?
Mr. Clare, this is quoted from your handbook.
Right.
Not.
So, and I will.
And Title 58 specifically calls out for only 2 appointments by the board, and that's the superintendent and the business administrator.
And I will say that I like being able to say that I don't do any of this.
That's
I
right.
really like it because it makes it much cleaner for me to say that I actually don't approve, or dismissals and things like that. But I would like that language to change in our handbook to represent what really happens, I guess.
Well, unless you're in the legislature, you're not going to
No,
change
but this
it.
is the handbook. This is the handbook, not the.
You're
not the-
approving I think it was the last board meeting, we talked about the negotiations, and that was, we can't talk about the specifics of that in this meeting, but that's when you are making those decisions.
Well, and we just didn't, just now in our consent agenda, we approved the
Okay.
the tentative agreements.
So that's your approval. So,
I would say that the interesting thing for me is the perception definitely is that the board is making decisions, employment decisions, and that's not the case. We've delegated that to the superintendent and the business administrator, but I've had multiple people say to me over the last couple of weeks, as you know, that there's been lots of changes. Why did you decide that? Why did the board decide that? And I say, the board didn't decide that. The board approves that, but we don't usually approve that. I mean, there are some appointments lately that we were informed about and had the update before it was made public, which I appreciate. But then we still haven't seen on a consent agenda a couple months ago.
Because they would be changes, not.
There's no change in their contract.
See, because we're approving a contract versus approving a position that they're holding. And I think that I would love to see some change in there. And I spoke to you about this because I think that is where our population is upset, that changes are being made in where people are placed and what's happening with people. And yet that's not, since they're already hired, we have no say in that. And I know that it has been given to Mikkel, but I think there are certainly some schools used to be able to have more input. We have this lateral move now that we have no input in, and the school has no input. And I think that is something that has changed over the last 20-something years, whatever. Whenever it's changed, I don't know. But, you know, those lateral moves didn't just happen, just like teachers don't just transfer because they want to. They have to be approved by this, you know, there's an interview process.
So, for example, a principal moving to take a district position, that's not something that we would.
Right, we don't.
If it's lateral,
If they're promoted to a different level, different salary scale level, or a different classification, then we would
Then
we
it would
approve
say it would have a
it.
change in contract.
So just for clarification for me, when you send out an email to the board saying, just for, you know, confidential update, this is
Right.
what's going to happen. At that point, I mean, there have been a couple incidents, one recently, where my immediate reaction was to respond to you with my personal feelings on that. Is that appropriate?
Sure.
If you're looking
Yes.
for that feedback on.
It's appropriate to respond with your personal feelings and also to respond with other things
What
in
I
the
felt like would
community
be
you might know.
and it was my personal feelings in that case. But then I also communicated later what I felt like would be my community's response to that, which I think I was accurate on. I think I had a pulse on that.
But
It doesn't
and
change
the part that
anything.
I think is missing is the community having an input on it before the decision is made. And that's the part that I.
Well, can we, if you, I don't want to
I
cut
understand
anyone
that's
off or
what it
hear,
is.
I want to hear all this, and I think it's very valuable to hear, because I agree with you, Catherine, Melissa, Michael, that the perception is that we're making all these decisions, and in fact, we're not. So part of the reason for asking for this context was to open that discussion and see if everyone understood it the same way. And I was aware before, Michael, that you had concerns about the contract. I mean, we brought that up before and discussed it since you've been on the board. Rosemary, your issue around the lateral movements of principals and what you said to me in the email that you sent back to me, I interpreted a little bit different than this. I thought you were saying that McKell had more frequently than ever before moved ineffective administrators from one school to the other. And I wanted to make sure that we talked before we brought it up, because I didn't really fully understand what you were saying. But in thinking about this, and I'm begging your forgiveness a little bit here, because as you, most of you know, the last 10 days of my life have been totally dominated by a completely different thing. So, but in reading through all of your comments and talking to people on the telephone and in person, I think it would perhaps be valuable, and Craig may want to weigh in on this, or Patrick, to look at these employment contracts with the negotiated agreements now that we have, or we think we've got them all settled. Maybe take time in our meeting to look through and see what they actually say about issues like movement of people laterally.
I doubt they would, but to me, it's not a contractual thing. It is a change in how we look at
Our
shared
procedure.
site-based, and how the schools have input in,
Right.
just like they do now, they have an input. Teachers used to be able, 30 years ago, just put in for a transfer and they were transferred. They didn't have any interview. Now, we still have that same process or we have a new process for administrators, which we certainly didn't have years ago either.
Well, and again,
Our process.
I don't have this all in front of me, Rose, but I think we have been informed over the last several years through the contract process of changes in the way that administrators, that were asked for by administrators, in the way that they can be transferred and apply for new positions. I'm assuming they're in the agreements, or at least some description of them is.
it's called a written understanding.
And written understanding, and I'm thinking that maybe we need all of us as a board to look at those documents together and have an opportunity to answer questions. And then if this issue of school, because I know for some members of the community, every time an administrator is placed in a position, they're angry because they want to have
Somebody else, right?
well, not necessarily they want somebody else, but they want to be asked. They want
Right.
their piece in the process. And I think that would be universally true. I also know that sometimes you go through a very detailed process of collecting feedback from the community, constituting committee, getting parents involved, interviewing people, and they still end up with an administrator they don't like after a few months. So it's not as though only one process works and the other process doesn't work. It's more complicated than that.
Heather?
Yes.
Can I clarify though, first of all, I don't agree with Mikkel's interpretation of what Robson said, because I remember Robson saying twice, and, you know, it's a matter of record, we could go back and look at it, you know, on our own. But he said he said as a board that we approve the placement of principals, he says, and if you have a problem with the placement of principals, and you vote against that, he said your problem isn't with the principal, it's with the superintendent. And he said that twice, and then I don't agree with Flo, this isn't state law, it's not just policy, the policy comes from state law. And I don't agree that we delegated this authority to the superintendent unless there's some action, like the handbook says, that if the board delegated that, then somebody show me in a meeting where that action was taken to delegate the authority that was given.
And this goes into
state law.
a different topic that we can discuss later on. I realize, Michael, that you feel that way
It's not
really
that I
strongly.
feel. I'll videotape it after this meeting, and I'll quote the law in there. I can show what happens, and then people call me and they go, "What is wrong with these people?" I say, "I don't know." I mean, it's right there. It's in black and white. It's already said. It's not what I feel. It's what's been said, and I can demonstrate it.